Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Reeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Hello and welcome today to our lovely guest, Meredith Woolnough. Hi Meredith.
Hi, Sue.
It's lovely to speak to you today, and I have a little short bio here, but before I say that, Meredith is our first guest from Australia, so it's been on my list for I don't know how long to actually get some more guests from around the world, and Australia and New Zealand in particular. And anyway, so Meredith is our first Aussie from down under.
Honoured to be your first Aussie.
Yay! So, Meredith Woolnough is an internationally acclaimed visual artist based in Newcastle, Australia. Her practice engages with the natural environment, utilising the skeletal frameworks of various flora and fauna as the basis of her own embroidered specimens. Threads are densely stitched into freeform sculptures that are carefully pinned to paper, preserving them as delicate handmade artefacts. Meredith holds a degree in Fine Arts, a Master of Teaching, and a Bachelor of Natural History Illustration, because one degree just wasn't enough, was it? And she teaches workshops in her embroidery and art techniques. She's also the author of the book Organic Embroidery, published in 2018 by Schiffer. And as ever, you can find all the links for Meredith and some examples of her artwork on her episode of stitcherystories.com. So that's Meredith Woolnough, and she's got a really brilliant way of explaining how you say her name, because it looks a bit confusing. It's just enough wool, enough wool to make a jumper, which I thought was it. So, and yes, you can find her on Instagram and Facebook as well. So there we are. That's all the links and all the bios and everything. So yeah, really excellent speaking to you today, Meredith. So do you want to let us know what you've been working on in this lockdown period and what's got you excited?
Sure. Well, in this lockdown period and also before it, I decided this year I was going to take on a project where I was going to work to a certain number of pieces. And as a number, I chose the number 100. Nice big round number. So I set myself this challenge that I wanted to create 100 new pieces. And the aim was to have it done by August or early August of this year, because I have a solar exhibition coming up then. So I've sort of been chipping away at that since then, releasing one every couple of days as I can on my social media. I just released number 62. So I'm just over halfway, but I still feel like I have a long way to go.
Yeah.
And it's been a great project, actually. The pieces are naturally quite small. They'd have to be to create that many of them. Some of my other works are really large and take, weeks and months to stitch. So it's been really refreshing to work at this small scale, and it's given me this wonderful opportunity to explore things that have just been ideas bubbling away in my head for a long time, or just having to develop completely new ideas so that I can keep producing new things and I'm not just making a lot of the same thing. So it's been a challenging project so far, but it's also been really rewarding because it's kind of pushed me in new directions.
Yeah, a challenging challenge is always a good idea, isn't it?
Well, it's not a challenge if it doesn't challenge you.
It's not, is it? So, yeah, wow, 100 pieces. Now, I think at this point, might be a good idea to describe, and we will get into techniques and things, but just giving an idea about what it is that you are actually doing. Is this machine embroidery or hand embroidery? That gives us some scale, doesn't it, as to how long these things take?
Some context is always good.
Yeah.
So yes, it is a machine embroidery. My love is freehand machine embroidery, so drawing with your sewing machine, and then I exclusively work on the water-soluble, dissolvable fabrics. So the embroideries themselves are quite sculptural. They're never flat. Even if they are flat, I mount them so that they're spaced off a backing board on pins, so they sort of appear to float and they're quite a three-dimensional object in themselves. So that's the technique that I'm working on in a nutshell. And then subject matter-wise, I'm really interested in natural forms and structures. So there's a lot of common subject matter, common motifs that you'll see in my work that are natural structures that I'm particularly interested in. So things like coral, particularly coral fans. I've been stitching coral fans now for well over a decade. Can't get enough of it. Also, different leaf structures I'm really interested in. Also, certain structures in shells and mollusks. They're sort of some of the main categories that I find myself falling into. But of course, this 100 Embroideries project, I've had to push myself beyond those safe zones. And although there's still a lot of that in there, I don't think I'm ever going to pry myself away from those particular subjects. There are some ones that feel very different for me. So, for example, I recently, in the last 20 or so pieces, I had a little depiction of a bird. Never done a mammal before. Oh, no, it's not a mammal. Done an animal like that before. I even did a butterfly. There's always a joke in the workshops that I teach that someone in the workshop will end up doing a butterfly without any prompting. I know at some point it's going to turn up. One of the students is going to make a butterfly, which is fine, which is lovely. But I'd never made one, I guess, until now. And it was a really fun little activity to do. So it's been great, actually, to try out completely different things. Not sure if I will ever attempt those sorts of things again beyond this project, but it's been so nice to give those different things a go, and they fit into the series quite seamlessly. It's quite surprising.
Yeah, because that was just something I was thinking there when you were talking. Obviously, you like those skeletal forms, and we've all seen the leaves that have disappeared, and you've just got the veins. It's made the skeleton, the shells, all those kind of things. But I guess it must be a different kind of challenge that you've decided you're going to make all these pieces, and it needs to look coherent because you're aiming for an exhibition as well. So you're, I suppose, visualizing how it's all going to look when it's finished, even before you've started, kind of thing. And I guess there must be a fine line then between creating a series and getting stuck in a rut.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's been a real challenge because, yes, it is. It's 100 pieces, but it's 100 pieces, like you said, that have to work together. They have to look cohesive. They have to look like they're all made by the same artist. And there are a few pieces that do stand out because they're different, whether it's because they're different in colour or they're very, very solid embroidery, while so much of my embroidery is very lace-like. Thankfully, because there's so many of them, those ones that stand out do tend to kind of blend in eventually. Yeah. But it's been this juggling act from the beginning because I had it in my mind not just to make these 100 pieces, but yes, I wanted it to be shown so that they were shown in order of how I made them and how I released them. So I couldn't just make 20 coral designs in my happy safe zone and have them all together. They're all the same sort of thing and sort of color. I had to make sure that, I spread those sorts of things out throughout the whole series. And so it's not just about fitting, creating 100 pieces. It's creating 100 pieces that fit together in a way that looks balanced when they're all together. So I have a big Photoshop file that I have going, a big grid, big 10 by 10 grid, and I'm trying to sort of fit them all in. So I might be, at the moment, I'm working and I'm like, okay, I need some red. I need something red in there. So it's not just enough for me to come up with a new design every couple of days. I have to come up with a red design that will fit in that blank spot in my grid. And it's getting harder the further I get through the series. I've exhausted all my tried and tested and much loved motifs and designs, and now I'm pretty much in entirely new territory, but I still have to look like it relates to all that early stuff. So
yeah, wow. Yeah, in fact, I'm glad I've been poking around with this question, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, I'm doing a 100-piece challenge. But I think it's only when you actually start to dig into it, what that actually means, that you realise the scope of the challenge that you've taken upon yourself. So, because I was wondering how you'd organised all of this. But yeah, that makes sense. A big grid. It's like organising a giant Instagram grid as well, isn't it, really?
It kind of is.
Yeah. Do you have all these things laid out anywhere in real life as well? Or are they just kind of piled up in a box, right? Phew, that's, number 62 goes in. I've got it all on Photoshop. It's fine. How are you balancing that, Meredith?
A bit of both. So these all pieces are going to be framed up individually. They get framed like little artworks, in little box frames behind glass. So they're like little specimens. All my work does get framed up like that and makes them very precious. Also makes them really easy to sell because they're idiot-proof artworks. They can be hung on the wall. These little ones can also stand up on their own. So that's a common issue with textile artwork. People are very concerned sometimes about purchasing it because they're worried about how they're going to display it or how they're going to keep it clean if it's something that's just hung on the wall or draped in a corner. So that's a very conscious decision that I've made across the board with my work. It also works with my overarching concept that I'm creating things that mimic nature, and they're sort of these stitched specimens, and they're presented like specimens, very similar to the way that insect collections are presented, all pinned and then safely preserved. So I don't think I answered your question. I think I got quite sidetracked. But they are framed, so I'm sort of making them and then framing them in batches. So as I make enough to fill up a box, they go off to the framer and then I get another box of framed ones back. So I've got at least 30 with me in the studio framed, and then I've probably got I've got some at the framer now, and then I've also got probably at least a dozen in the studio with me, and I'm normally working hopefully at least 4 or 5 pieces ahead of what I'm actually releasing on social media. So I've got a few that I can sort of juggle around in my grid and actually play with in the studio to make sure that the series is going together well, and I can identify those gaps and make pieces to fit in the gaps. So it's a digital juggling game in my Photoshop file. But yes, there's nothing like having the real things in front of you as well. So I work in both ways to try and make the series all fit together.
Right. And so by the sound of it then, when you say this is number 62, that's it. It's number 62. It's not going to suddenly go, no, it's number 86 now because I didn't plan it. No, it's 62. That's it.
Locked in. Yep. And I guess that's a restriction I've put on myself with the series. When you go into a project like this, I think you do really need to think through, how am I going to do this? What limitations am I going to put on myself? How am I going to ensure it's going to be successful? So mine they're all made to the same size. They all fit on the same size board. So that's a restriction. And then, yes, I decided, no, I'm going to release these as I make them. I'm not just going to make 100 in isolation and then put them together in a way that looks best. I'm going to set myself that extra challenge of, trying to keep a bit ahead. But 162 just down, that's it. It's locked in.
Right. And just to come back to the size issue, so you said these are all kind of small. So what are we talking about in size of small dimensions?
Yep. So once they're framed, they measure 20 by 20 centimetres. So they're quite sweet little things. And the embroideries themselves, they do range within sizes.
Yeah,
but, we're talking 10, 12 centimetres in diameter sort of thing. So they're small, but they're achievable to make in a few days. And but sometimes small is not easier.
No.
Sometimes, it's a real challenge to make small things. So
I suppose it's because you're adapting your technique to the scale of what you're doing. So let's go to the other end of the scale. What are the biggest pieces that you've created? Again, so then we can understand the challenge of, if you work on big scale, going to smaller is, as you say, it's not easier.
Not necessarily, no. So a lot of my pieces, because they are framed up to be sold, so they're not ridiculous sizes, most works. The largest single piece I've made, like one piece of embroidery, is a great big gum leaf, and it's called scribbly gum leaf, which is one of the many beautiful native eucalyptus trees we have here in Australia. I actually collected this leaf. I'm always picking up leaves. My pockets end up full of them. And it was curled up on itself almost in a perfect circle. Like, it was just amazing. So I then painstakingly mapped out all the tiny internal veins in that leaf or close enough to them, and then basically blew that design up so it was a size that I could create an embroidery where I did map all the veins, and the final leaf ended up being about 1 meter in diameter. It was quite circular, and it's just installed straight on the wall. So that was the largest single piece I ever made, and it took me months to stitch. I just felt like it was never going to end. But whenever you start a big work, it's like it's really, really exciting at the beginning of the work, and then the middle feels like this hard slog, and then you get really, really excited at the end again.
Yeah,
so it was great to see that one finished. The other sort of large work that I have, there's quite a big piece that's in an exhibition that's travelling around Australia at the moment. In fact, it's almost done. It's been travelling for about 3 years, just on its last stop very soon. And that's an exhibition here that's called the Tamworth Textile Triennial, like the name suggests. It happens every 3 years, and it's a curated exhibition. And so I have quite a large piece of that that's made up of many embroideries, but all installed together. So it's over 400 individual pieces, but they're all installed, again, in a big circular shape. I tend to love to work in circles. Might have something to do with the fact that I always work in an embroidery hoop. I'm just circles. And it measures, I think, 135 centimetres in diameter. So they're probably the two largest works I've ever made. And yes, obviously they took a very long time, but that's kind of something that's exciting. Embroidery is often quite small because it's labour intensive, and even though my work is made on the machine, and that definitely speeds up the process, there's still a lot of labour invested in each piece. But that's part of their appeal, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot to be excited about for that exhibition. Now, we'll get onto that towards the end, because we always just go into future plans. So, but what I'm quite interested in, though, is that having kind of listed out your degrees there, you've come from a fine arts background, an illustration background. So how did you get interested in embroidery and textile art, Meredith? What was the leaping off point for that?
Sure, good question. Well, my love and interest in textiles actually came about at art school, but it was almost by accident. I wasn't really a sewer growing up. You know, my mum would make the odd clothes, but there wasn't that rich family history of embroiderers or anything like that, you know, and I didn't study it at high school or anything like that. But when I went to art school, because I've always been an arty person, I actually planned to major in photography when I got there, but I stuffed up my enrollment and ended up, when you go to art school, or at least mine, you know, you can do all these little taster courses where you do these little 4-week courses and all the different things you can major in, because you've got to choose a major. And textiles was one of the ones that I tested out, and I was just so interested in it because it just seemed like such a huge area. There was so much in textiles and textile arts, and of course I went to art school because I wanted to learn everything. So I thought, this is a major where I'm going to learn everything. So I ended up majoring in textiles, and I loved it, and spent a good, you know, the 3 years of the degree dabbling in all these different things, definitely mastering none of them, but I had a fabulous time. And it was during those 3 years that I was introduced to the freehand machine embroidery technique, or the free motion technique, however you want to call it, basically drawing with your sewing machine. And I loved that concept. I loved the look of a stitched drawing. I spent a lot of time, you know, drawing on fabric, as a lot of people do with free motion, and really enjoying that. And then, you know, as you start exploring machine embroidery, you then discover this wonderful material that is the water-soluble fabric, water-soluble stabilizer. And I just thought that was the bee's knees. Like, this was a fabric that I could use in place of a woven-based fabric. And then I could do my stitch drawing, and then I could wash away the fabric and just be left with that lace-like drawing. I sort of felt like I was liberating embroidery from the base fabric.
I love that idea.
It sounds very grand.
It is magic as well, though, isn't it? When you do dissolve it.
Yeah, it opened up so many creative possibilities. And of course, as I started to experiment with it, I, you know, learnt that you could shape and mold the embroideries, which opened up more sculptural areas to work in. So I ended up doing a 4th year on my degree, an honours year, and I decided to focus on the use of freehand machine embroidery on the water-soluble base fabric. So really I was given this educational luxury where I could spend a year experimenting with it, making all the mistakes, doing all the wrong things, hopefully developing some right ways of working. And it really set me on the trajectory of where I am today. I fell in love with the process and found the way that I like to work with it. And the way that I work with it is not the only way. It's really a tiny slice of the big pie of possibilities. But I just love it. And that was back in 2006 when I did my honours year. So that's like 14 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I'm obviously still chugging away at it, and I still love it.
That's a fabulous story, because quite often people have been to university and then they've done the degree, and even if it's been in arts or textiles or something, and then it's kind of like, right, okay, now what? I
had that moment too, don't worry. But that's also why I then went on and studied teaching, because I finished my degree. And although, I had this technique that I loved and everything, the thought of becoming a professional artist, it was almost like I didn't entertain it. I don't know if it was a bit of imposter syndrome, or I just didn't feel that was a real job. I needed to get a real job. So I went and studied teaching, and it wasn't a fallback for me. I was always interested in teaching, and I really loved teaching. But I was always trying to work as an artist on the side. I was doing these group shows. My school holidays were hardcore stitching sessions.
Yeah.
I'd take time off work to do shows, and there was interest in my work because I think it was quite unique, and that was definitely something that worked in my favour. So that kind of took off, and I eventually got to a point where a few things happened. First of all, I was going to move to a totally new city. Moved to Newcastle, where I now live.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up leaving my very stable, regular income teaching job and moving up here. And one of the trade-offs of that is like, okay, I'm going to focus more on this art practice that's starting to build and see where that goes. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity. It was a scary choice to make, and it's definitely not been an easy process, but it's been so satisfying. So it's definitely the right place for me.
Oh, that's brilliant, because several guests have been through that scary, right? Either they've been made redundant or something's happened for health reasons, or they've just said, you know what, it's my time now, stuff it. I am going to move into following my dream and turning my art into my business, take it seriously, and let things grow. So, and everybody always says to me, oh, it was a really interesting story, it was really inspiring, and quite a few people who are now kind of trying to launch their art practice have often commented how inspiring stories like yourself are, because it gives people that shove to say, other people have done this, there's no reason why they can't do it too. So that's great. Were you teaching art or something else?
Yes, so I was teaching visual art, I was teaching textiles and design, and I was teaching photography. I did sneak a lot of photography into my degree. So I was teaching all the fun stuff, all the messy stuff.
Yeah. Oh, fabulous. You hadn't gone and I better go and teach maths or something instead, because that happens as well.
It's definitely not my forte.
Brilliant. Now, we talk about inspiration. So I guess you've learnt a technique, and then did you think, what can I do with it? Or while you were learning it, did it unveil itself as, oh, I could make this, that and the other with it? How did that happen, Meredith?
I think it's a bit of both, really. I obviously had this technique. I had this way that I like to work with it. And after, a year of working solely with it, I was fairly confident with it and understood what I could do with it and what maybe wouldn't be so successful with it. So I was always looking for subject matter that would be suited to the medium that I've chosen. You know, whatever medium you use, you've got to make sure you choose subject matter that's suited to it, or that's it's probably not going to work out how you want. And I've always loved natural forms and structures, and it really, the direction that my work is in now really started when I did my first series of coral works. And I just learned to scuba dive, and I had done a big holiday up on the Great Barrier Reef, which is up above me. And, of course, there's amazing things to see. And I was so taken by the coral. So my first ever series was a series of 9 small circular designs based on various coral structures and forms. And I just fell in love with it. And I was so interested not just in the things I was making, but in the animal that I was depicting. And that led me down this research rabbit hole. I'm also a bit of a science nerd. So, I was so into not just creating the art, but learning all about these amazing creatures and different species. And that's always been an interesting part of my work, or a very important part of my work, is the research that goes into understanding the particular plant or animal that I'm depicting, so I can depict it well, or at least feel that I'm good friends with it before I try to replicate it. Yeah. And that's what also led me to studying the other degree. I never planned to go back and do another degree, but it was just too perfect a fit for me, and that was the natural history illustration degree. So when I moved to Newcastle up here, in stepping away from teaching a bit, I wanted to go back and learn basic drawing and painting skills, because I'd spent my whole art degree focusing so much in textiles that I felt that I just didn't have those basic skills under my belt, and it was getting in the way of my work. I wanted to draw certain things, but I couldn't get the ideas from my head through my hands to the paper. So
right, yes.
I really wanted to develop that, and I was just thinking, just go and do a little drawing course. But I kept hearing about this degree up here, and it's only offered up here, and sadly I think it's actually ending soon. It's one of the few places in the world where you can study natural history illustration, so that covers many different things, but very particular botanical, entomological, scientific, to much more creative fields. And it was just too perfect a fit for me, because it was this wonderful combination of art and science and nature. They were all things that I was already working with in my embroideries. So I studied that, and it has enriched my practice so much, and mostly in the research and fieldwork side of things. So now when I look to create a new work, it really does start with that original specimen. If I can go out and find something that interests me, I will then do a lot of pre-work, a lot of sketchbook work, a lot of photos, a lot of research, and then I feel that the resulting designs that I create for my embroideries are so much stronger as a result, because I have this in-depth understanding of the particular plant or animal, and whatever generally first drew me to that plant or animal is generally the aspect of it that I tease out and get represented strongly in my work, whether it's colour or structure or whatever. Yeah, that's kind of where it all comes from, and where the inspiration comes from. So it definitely comes from the plant or animal first.
Yeah. Now, I would just say at this point, I was having a poke about in your website and your blog, and I come across this lovely film. It's a lovely film, and there you are, and you're drawing, and you're looking through your sketchbooks, and well, I always have sketchbook envy because I'm rubbish at drawing. And it's just like, wow, yeah. So it's just really nice. It was just lovely to see your sketches, and that how you started the whole process. So yeah, that degree totally was a perfect fit for you, wasn't it? And
it was.
Now you mentioned, so obviously, we know what your favourite technique is and your favourite material. You just mentioned there about how you can sculpt, kind of turn them into a bit 3D. So what do you do there? What sort of an example would that be, Meredith?
Well, it's kind of, I think anyone who's played with water-soluble learns very quickly that you wash it away and you end up with this gluey handful of mess. But that gluiness you can use to your advantage. So water-soluble fabric is made of polyvinyl alcohol fibres, same stuff as PVA. So we're all familiar with PVA glue.
Yeah.
And so, if you can time the way you wash and really not wash out all the water-soluble fabric, so a bit of it's still inside your embroidery, you can then shape the embroidery, stretch it over a mold, or, just kind of create somehow that you can let it dry. And, within the realms of physics, you've got to be realistic with it, but it's dry and it'll hold that shape. So, you can get these beautiful lace-like drawings that start flat on your fabric, but then you can bring them to life by shaping and forming them. And I just think that's really marvelous. So that's it. It's as simple as that. It's using the water-soluble fabric and pushing it a bit beyond it just being this temporary surface for you to stitch on and then expecting it to disappear and it's done its job. It can still do more of a job in helping you to shape the embroideries, which I think is very exciting.
Right, yeah, and it's funny that you said that you finished up with this kind of like gooey blob, and then of course if you haven't done it very well, you finish up with a load of gluey threads
Yeah.
without the blob bit.
There's obviously, you've got to, and this is what's come from all my years of trial and error, really.
Yeah.
It's that fine line between getting the moulding and shaping and not having it look like a snail has crawled all over it and left this gluey residue all over the outside, which can happen. So it's like anything, understanding your medium well and knowing how you want to use it and how to use it to get the best result.
Yeah. So what would you say then, Meredith, out of all of this? Have you got any definite high points that you'd like to share with us through your journey so far?
Sure. Well, I think, exhibitions like the Tamworth Textile Triennial are real high points professionally for me because that's, the sort of exhibition that you aspire to in art school. Writing the book was obviously a high point as well. That was a huge job, and I quite stupidly took that job on at the same time that I had my daughter. So that was a juggle, but very satisfying to see at the end. But then otherwise, I think one of the great things and the thing that I love the most about my work, like I love creating the work. There's nothing like creating something beautiful that you're proud of. But the next step of that is I sell my work. I don't just make it and hoard it. And it's so lovely to see other people's reactions to your work and the fact that they love it so much that they want to take it home and look at it every day. And I still have people who bought my work years and years and years ago who still get in touch with me or who come across me at an exhibition or something and they're like, I love your work that I have and I just love looking at it every day and it makes me happy. And, that's an amazing feeling and that's an amazing thing to think that you've created something that not only the people are happy to live with, but that they just really enjoy. So probably the greatest highlight of what I do.
Yeah, that is so lovely that people have taken the time, if they bumped into you again, or even just sent you a message out the blue or whatever it happens to be, that to tell you again how much they love what they've bought from you and that they still get that pleasure of looking at it. So, yeah, that must be so satisfying.
It's wonderful. And I'm so grateful that people say that because some people are often very, very shy about talking to you about your work, which is weird. But so it is, it's so humbling and lovely to just know that they still appreciate and love their work. Makes you all warm and fuzzy.
Oh. Normally, after we've looked at high points, then we kind of talk about, have you had any disasters? Or really things that probably didn't go as planned is probably a fairer word. And, really what have you learnt from that experience? So have you got anything that you can share with us on that scope, Meredith?
I knew you were going to ask this question and I did rack my brain to try and come up with something, but I've never had anything that I would consider a disaster. I've never set anything on fire or stabbed myself or hurt myself or anything like that. Obviously, things go wrong all the time. Well, they don't necessarily go wrong. They just don't turn out like you expect.
Yeah.
But there's often those wonderful learning opportunities and those happy accidents that you get something new from. But I'm a pretty logical person, and I suppose as well now with my work, although I'm always trying new things, it's not at that really exciting new experimental stage where you don't know what's going to happen. I have been working with these processes and techniques for so long now, and I understand them so well that I can pretty much predict how things are going to turn out, which is, not as exciting as when you start off, but it's also, I guess, when you sort of, I won't call myself a master of this yet. I don't know if you can ever master something, but I've got a pretty firm grasp on it. But yeah, things happen like you don't expect all the time, but I would never call it a disaster.
No. And so now you strike me as somebody who wouldn't have any UFOs. Do you finish everything off then, Meredith?
Generally, because generally I'm making a work for a show or a commission or something like that, and I get in generally only working on one or two pieces at a time. The closest thing I probably have to a UFO is I have a pile of beautiful bluey green embroideries sitting in my studio, and they've been sitting there for a while now. And it's a pile of unfinished or just I haven't got the final purpose for them yet because I decided to work in a different way to how I normally work. So I normally do all my research and have my specimen and come up with my design, and then I make my work, and, you know, and I sort of that kind of process. I know what it's going to look like. I know how it's going to go together. But I decided to sort of break that mold a little bit and create a whole heap of pieces, and they are quite organic. They're based off a motif that I do use a lot, a little corallite design based off the little coral cups you find in a coral skeleton.
Yeah.
But repeated and enlarged. And I've made dozens of these things, maybe close to 100, and invested a lot of time in making them. But I never had it in my head what the final thing would look like, how they would come together, how they would fit together. And it's so different for me. Every now and then I'll get them out and move them around. It's like a jigsaw puzzle that doesn't quite fit, and try different things, and I'm yet to settle on what I'm going to do with them. So that's probably the closest thing I have to a UFO, and who knows if anything will ever come from it.
Now, so really, to me, that seems like a combination of a UFO and a disaster. So because you said you deliberately wanted to challenge yourself with your process and didn't want to kind of plan, and just kind of almost set off and did it. And so now you're kind of left with the struggle, aren't you, of the results of that experiment?
The gamble didn't really pay off, or it didn't pay off how I hoped. But, you know, and it is a bit of a shame at the beginning because you put so much time into it. But I think, you know, the longer something sits in the pile, the less precious you get about it. And who knows, maybe eventually I'll chop them up, or, you know, throw them in a bucket of something. I don't know. But at the moment it is something that didn't quite work out, and that I don't know what I'm going to do with it.
Right, yeah. So is it more you don't know what to do with it? You don't know how to group and present them? Are you trying to make some kind of series or some kind of coherent thing out of them? Is that the problem, not necessarily the works themselves?
Yeah, I think that is the problem. You know, how, if these are going to turn into an artwork at some point, what shape and form will that take? At the moment, I don't know. Everything I've tried, I haven't been happy with. Right.
So that's a different kind of challenge than what people would normally present, where they actually the work themselves, something went either wrong, or they've changed their mind about the colour, or it didn't just work out in the creation side of things. But I think, to be honest, Meredith, this is one of the first times when somebody's talked about the fact that they're not, it's like the ultimate purpose for them they're not sure about, or how they're all going to combine together, or, you know, it's like the organisation of them as opposed to the construction and appearance of them.
That's exactly right, yeah. It's like I've made these things. I'm happy with them. They're quite lovely objects. But now I don't know what to do next with them.
Right. Well, there we are. So, well, do you know what? Thank you very much for starting off to say, no, I don't really have anything. Actually, you've got a really good, interesting combination of disaster's too strong, but, you know, something that hasn't worked out as you thought and is therefore now sitting on the UFO pile for that very reason. So that was a good one. Now, you mentioned about when you created your book that you had your daughter in the midst of doing all of that. So obviously you've got a little toddler toddling around the place.
She just turned 3 a couple of weeks ago.
Turned 3. Oh, crikey, into everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So how do you, therefore, Meredith, manage having a 3-year-old toddling around the place and finding time to focus on your creativity and your art practice and making your work for sale and exhibition?
Oh, I just do the best I can.
Yeah.
It's an ultimate juggle. I think it is with anyone who's a parent or you know, anything like that. I do try to make time for creating, and so my daughter's in daycare a couple of days a week, and those days are studio days. I have a studio away from my home because I need to go to work. And they're days that I get in and I try and remove all other distractions. I don't take my laptop or anything. And they're the days that I can just sew and make. And it's that wonderful space that I can create in. And then all the other aspects of the business, and of which there are many,
yes,
or the admin side of things, I just try and fit in where I can. So working at night, or when my daughter takes a nap, or whatever, early mornings. and you just try to fit it in where you can. But it is a struggle, and it was definitely an adjustment period when we had her, because things had to really slow down and change and adapt. But, you just kind of roll with it and make things priorities if they're really important to you. But also trying to juggle that family life it's a constant balancing game.
Yeah, and it's interesting though that you've made that purposeful decision that you're having an external space, so you can go there, escape. Everybody knows what you're doing. It's like, right, okay, it's Meredith Stay at the studio today. So there's no like negotiation. There's no, but kind of thing. It's just like, that's it. And I think sometimes that makes things a lot easier, doesn't it? Have you always had a separate studio, Meredith?
No, not always. I used to have, the home studio, but I just found it just took over. It took over the house. It was the largest room in the house, and I filled it up very quickly, outgrew it very quickly. And then when it's at home, you can never really get away from it.
True.
Or you have to sort of pack it up every time you want to do anything else. So I moved to a separate studio. I first had a studio within a community art space, which was great because you're surrounded by other artists.
Yeah.
Working as an artist is actually a very lonely job because it's just you. So that was great. But, like a lot of those community spaces, they sometimes you get moved on or whatever. So now I have a space on my own. It's a beautiful space. It's actually way nicer than it should be for an artist studio. But yes, it is really good for me to go to that space, that designated studio, and that works well for me. Yeah, well worth it.
Yeah, as you say, it helps you to be productive, which is therefore, extremely, extremely important when you need to be productive. So you mentioned just at the start there about doing your 100 pieces challenge for an exhibition. Now, there's so many artists that I've spoke to, and just I know of, everybody's had everything cancelled all year because of this annoying virus. So how has it affected you, Meredith? Do you think this exhibition is actually going to go ahead?
Plans are that it will in one form or the other. Yeah. I think we are in a bit of a better situation than you are over in the UK, in that we seem to be recovering from this COVID situation. Obviously, we all went into isolation, and that had a huge effect on my practice as well, because my daughter wasn't in childcare, and the sewing machine came back out on the kitchen table, but it's just not the same. But thankfully, the exhibition being in August, still being a few months away, and as things are starting to open back up over here, we're quietly confident that things will be back to normal by August. So that show should go ahead as planned. And if it doesn't, it will still be online. That's the way a lot of things are going these days.
Yeah.
Or the gallery will be open by appointment. But yeah, fingers crossed, it should be back to business as usual by then, and that's what we're aiming and planning for. So,
right. Oh, well, that'd be brilliant if that does actually go ahead then, won't it? A nice silver lining, as a glimmer of hope at the end of all this dreadful
something to look forward to. For sure.
Yeah, definitely. And then, so other than that, not to diminish the achievement of getting that exhibition up and running, do you have any other future plans and projects that you've got kind of outlined that you'd like to share with us today, Meredith, just as we kind of wrap up?
So I've been working, all my workshops and face-to-face workshops got cancelled, which was a bit of a shame because I was going to Canada and all sorts of exciting things.
Oh, crikey, yeah.
But that's okay. That's the way it goes. But it's it's encouraged me to do things that I've been talking about and thinking about for a long time. So
I've heard that story a lot recently.
Yeah, we all have. We're all pivoting and adapting. So I've been working on some online courses. I'm actually just about ready to launch my first little free basic introduction course that should hopefully happen in the next few weeks. So maybe by the time this airs, it'll be up and running. And then I'm working on a much bigger one, which really delves into, working on the water-soluble fabric that I love and making those sculptural embroideries and all that kind of theory that I would pass on in a face-to-face workshop. So I'm excited about exploring that.
And I'm so excited about your online course as well. So, of course, creating online courses is my thing, but I don't do it for anything exciting like embroidery. But still, I'm just putting one together on using MailChimp for email marketing at the moment.
Really useful. It's
very useful, but not as pretty. Right, Meredith, it's just been absolutely fantastic speaking to you. I'm really, really excited, looking forward to the rest of your work and stalking you on social media. And everybody do the same. Go and follow and go and have a look at her website and just keep in touch with what Meredith's doing. So thank you so much, Meredith.
Thank you, Sue. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and information around this podcast. Please visit stitcherystories.com. Of course, you can listen to Stitchery Stories on plenty of podcast apps at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify and plenty more besides. You can also ask your smart speaker to play Stitchery Stories podcast too. But wherever you listen, why not leave us a rating and a review to encourage other people to listen too? I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that for me. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. Keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery stories.